You may have heard that when you ask AI a question, it's like pouring a bottle of water down the drain. That's a popular comparison that's going around to explain how much water is used by AI. And that number comes from a study by researchers at UC Riverside. And it's the starting point for a recent proof investigation into AI and water usage. I'm Julia Angwin, the founder of Proof News, and this is Proof Ingredients, a series where we talk with journalists, content creators, and experts about what went into a great investigation they did. In this episode, we speak with Shaolei Ren, one of the authors of the AI and water study. He's an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at UC Riverside, and his work focuses on responsible AI for a sustainable and equitable future. Welcome, Professor Ren.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we're here to talk about AI and water usage. And specifically, you did a very important study that came out last year called Making AI Less Thirsty, Uncovering and Addressing the Secret Water Footprint of AI Models. So can you tell us just generally what were you looking at in that study and what led you to want to look into the water impacts of AI?
So we basically look at how much water AI will be consuming. By the way, water consumption is a technical term. So that means the water withdrawal minus water discharge. So essentially the evaporated portion of water into the atmosphere. So we want to study how much water was consumed for doing the training and doing the inference of some popular AI models like GPT-3. Our study has found that if you have a conversation of 10 to 50 queries with ChatGPT, you're going to consume roughly 500 milliliters of water. And that's, again, that consumption is evaporated water. And so why I started to work on this problem? I'm always interested in water and how we can save it. Because when I was a little boy, I spent a couple of years of my childhood in a small town where water was rationed and we only had access to water for half an hour each day. So we just had to use water wisely and think about every possible way to save it. Of course, the situation has changed and no longer water rationing anymore. I've just always been interested in how to save water. And when these large language models came out in recent years, people were amazed by how powerful, how capable they were. And some people started to look at the environmental impact and in particular look at the carbon emissions. So I asked myself, how much water does AI consume? So that somehow motivated our study, and we just did some further research, and I was really shocked by the numbers.
Yeah, I think everyone was shocked by the numbers you found. So let's walk through it slowly. So I don't think it's obvious to most people why AI would use water. So let's just start at the very beginning. Essentially what you're talking about, as I understand it, is data centers where all the computers live that do the work of artificial intelligence. So explain what you're looking at when you're talking about AI and water use.
AI uses water throughout the whole life cycle, from the direct water consumption to indirect water consumption. So the direct water consumption here we're talking about is for cooling down the data center facilities. So when you run the servers, when you do the training or inference, there's a huge amount of energy consumption, and the energy is eventually transferred into heat. So we just have to get rid of the heat from the servers to the outside environment. And there are two steps. The first step is the so-called server level cooling, where you move the heat from the servers to some outdoor heat exchanger or to the data center facility. And the second step is so-called facility level cooling, where we move the heat from the data center facility to the outside atmosphere. And usually water evaporation is the most efficient way to move the heat from the facility to the outside environment. And actually, many of the large tech companies are using water evaporation. So this is where direct water consumption occurs. So basically, we're just moving the heat from the facility to the outside environment. But some people always say, oh, we're sort of using closed loop. It's a circular. Well, that's actually within the data center. So inside the data center, you could use liquid or you could use air, and there should be no water consumption at all unless there's a leak. So when the direct water consumption is really about moving the heat from the data center facility to the outside environment. And for indirect water consumption, there are also two parts. One is for generating electricity, because when you use as coal, nuclear, natural gas, or even hydropower, there is a huge amount of water consumption. And the second part is for the supply chain for to make the AI chips, and we need ultra purified water to clean, to rinse the wafers to prevent contamination. So that's so-called scope 3 or supply chain water. But in our study, we didn't look at the supply chain water. We're only looking at the direct water consumption and also the water consumption for generating electricity.
What you're saying is it's actually worse than what you
Yeah,
described,
exactly.
because there's
Yeah,
water usage even further along the cycle. But let's focus
yes.
just on this is basically training and using AI, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you make a distinction between water withdrawal and water consumption. So can you spell that out and explain why that matters?
So water withdrawal is just simply taking the water from a source. For example, when we take a shower, we withdraw a lot of water, probably a few tens of liters or even more than 100 liters to take a shower. But we're just withdrawing water. We're not consuming much of it because the water that we take from the utility just goes back to the sewage immediately. And those water can be reused after processing in the short term. But water consumption is the evaporated portion of water. And that water, it goes somewhere else, and it could not be reused in the short term. Of course, the water still stays within our planet, but it just depends on where you are. Let's say in California, we have a rain season for just a few weeks a year. So the water evaporated, it'll come back, but with a lot of uncertainties.
So basically, what you're saying is when you take this water and you pour it out, some of it goes back into the ground and that's reabsorbed. So
Yeah,
essentially, that's
that's
the
not
part
consumption.
that's not consumption.
Yeah,
But the part that just evaporates into the air is the part
that's
that's lost, right? Is what you're
yeah, yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and actually,
Um,
some company even say this water consumption is considered permanently lost. Although it's not really permanent, but
doesn't it
you
go
get the
into the
idea. Yeah,
clouds and then somehow,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right. So that's our lost water that we're talking
Hmm.
about.
Yeah.
So when you decided you wanted to study this, though, it's not like you can go. I mean, I'm assuming the companies are not letting you come into their data centers to
No.
measure the water usage. So you had. Can you talk about sort of how did you collect the data and how hard was it? Because you do talk about how in the report how it was sort of a secret number.
So actually, getting the number was really challenging. That was probably the most challenging part because the methodology has been pretty straightforward. We've been using that for many other prior studies. But to get the numbers, first we look at the energy consumption for GPT-3. And usually the model developers do not disclose how much energy they use for inference. But somehow, I think that was one of the few models where the developers do say something about their energy consumption for inference. So we got the number from their own papers, and also we verified the number from some third-party studies for other similar models in terms of the size. So I think the number is a fairly accurate reflection of the actual energy consumption in the data center. And so once you have the energy consumption number, we also need the water efficiency number. Again, if you look at the large tech companies, most of them, they either do not talk about their water efficiency at all, or they just say their global annualized water efficiency. So which is basically not really useful for our estimate. Because we really want to know the regional water consumption for running the models. And so, but but Microsoft was more transparent compared to some other companies. So Microsoft discloses the regional water usage effectiveness, and actually for even for each data center location. So based on, having these two information, we also look at the power usage effectiveness. That's the energy overhead for cooling down the data centers, and also we check the regional water intensity for generating electricity, and then we combine all this information together and put it into our formula to come up with the estimate.
Basically, this whole study was about GPT-3 and comparable models. Is that sort of the scope of what you were looking at?
Yeah.
And so, just so our audience understands, that is what? Where are we? We're on GPT-4.
Yeah, we're on GPT-4. So GPT-4 is a completely closed system. So nobody knows exact the number, energy or water consumption. But some of the reports says GPT-4 is a lot bigger than GPT-3, and it probably uses the so-called mixture of expert architecture, which means at each time only a subset of the model is activated. So that basically adds more uncertainty to the estimate for GPT-4. But I would personally expect the water consumption and energy consumption of GPT-4 to be substantially higher than GPT-3.
So basically, what you're describing is that you did a study of like the early models. It's only going to be more consumption since then, and using the information that you got, explain to me what your findings were. What is, there's been this whole thing about the water bottle and how it's like one water bottle per query, but I think that's not quite right. So can you explain what is the actual usage that I would understand about my own AI usage?
So our estimate first was based on the annualized water efficiency number for each location. It's not the global level, but it's for different locations. So that's why you see a number range between 10 and 50. So that depends on where you are. Where the models are hosted. So if it's hosted in Arizona, then the number is probably much lower. But if it's in, say, in Ireland, then the number could go up. So it really varies a lot. And also between the number that we reported includes both the water consumption for directly cooling down the data center facilities and also the water for generating electricity. So these two parts are depending on where you are. These two parts, usually the electricity water is a little bit higher than the direct water consumption, but it could be comparable for some regions.
But the problem is you don't know when you're running a query
No,
which data center it's being sent to.
No. Actually, in a lot of cases, these inference are hosted in data centers operated by some third parties. They're not directly in those data centers directly owned by Microsoft. They could be hosted in, say, some colocation data center. And yeah, that's just there are more uncertainties, but we're basing our studies on the Microsoft's own locations.
You said basically that if you combined, in the paper it says Google, Microsoft, and Meta's water usage for AI annually, it would be the usage of twice Denmark's annual usage.
That's actually for the global AI demand, based on some projections of the energy usage in 2027. And also that refers to water withdrawal. So essentially, not the water consumption. Consumption part is much less than the water withdrawal part.
I see. Okay.
The reason that we only show the water withdrawal is there's no country level water consumption data. So from the CIA website, we only got the water withdrawal for each country. So that's why we compared the water withdrawal. But if you look at the water consumption part, it's still a lot, and it's probably comparable to some beverage companies. So essentially, if you view the global AI as a single company, the direct water consumption of AI will be easily the biggest beverage company in the world.
Which is Pepsi or Coke?
Yeah, probably be even bigger than those companies combined. Oh, by the way, the water they sell is also considered a water consumption because consumption It refers to evaporation and also the water you put into a product, for example, the Coke.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
basically, they're selling pallets and pallets and pallets of
Yeah,
this.
this is considered water consumption of
And that
those.
is actually less than what AI
Yeah,
is using, is what you're saying.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that's actually kind of terrifying.
yeah.
So,
It's a global. I mean, we're looking at the global scale. It's not for individual companies. Yeah,
right.
but if you do look at the individual company, yeah, some of them are already as big as a beverage company.
I guess I really hadn't
Uh,
thought about AI as being in the beverage business, but
yeah,
it's kind of amazing as a
in terms of the
comparison.
direct water consumption, we're not looking at the supply chain yet, because if you look at the supply chain, the story becomes a lot more complicated. The
Right.
supply chain for beverage companies is mostly for growing the crops and but those are green water actually. Green water is the water contained in the soil used by plants, and that's not directly accessible to human beings. And we for data center, for the water that we're talking about is mostly blue water in the surface water, surface rivers or groundwater sources. So these are very different. And actually, some people say, oh, if you produce 1 kilogram of beef, there's a huge amount of water footprint. But that's not really a fair comparison to the number that we show, because the beef water is nearly, I think 97 or 95% of the beef water is green water to grow the grass to feed the beef cattle. So essentially, that's the supply chain water for beef. But the AI water we talk about is only for the operational stage. We're not looking at the chips or the mine the rare earths to make the
Yeah, I
servers.
see.
Green water is anyway not usable directly for humans.
Right. But this is actually directly useful,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
would
yeah,
be if we could drink it, but instead it's
mm,
cooling all the
yeah,
computers.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, your finding was really shocking, and it was the only one I've seen on this topic. Is there a reason there hasn't been more research about AI and water use?
Um, well, I guess generally the water research is about 10 years behind the carbon research.
Okay.
So around 2010, those tech companies started to work on carbon neutrality. But only in 2020, they started to look at the water. And they look at the whole life cycle carbon, scope one, scope two, scope three. But most of the companies only look at the scope one water, which is the direct water consumption.
I
And actually, they have very little direct carbon emission, almost zero for data centers, unless you do some diesel generator testing for a couple of hours each year. There's no carbon emission directly. So all the carbon for data centers is basically for generating electricity and also for making the servers or constructing the data centers. But when it comes to water, tech companies only focus on the direct water consumption, with few a few exceptions. Some companies do look at the indirect water consumption for their electricity generation, but that's very few.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of variety in the
Yeah,
reporting and level of reporting that they
yeah.
offer about this. Did you hear any feedback from the companies about whether your numbers were right or wrong, or whether they disputed any of this?
No. So I'm confident in the methodology, and I'm transparent about all the number that we use. So uh, yeah, I trust my numbers, and it has been peer reviewed, and it will be published in communication of the ACM in a few months.
And every study has limitations, right? There's always
Yeah, yeah.
limitations to what you can know. So, what are the limitations you have for your findings, and that we should keep in mind when thinking about them?
So we only look at the annualized average values. So it's essentially during the summer, it could be a lot higher than the number that we present. And during the winter time, it could be lower. And yeah, that's one of the limitations. And also, we are not looking at, I mean, we're assuming each conversation has about like 200 to 300 words length. But in reality, if you write a short tweet, it could be shorter. Or if you write a long report, it could be bigger. So there are a lot of variety that we're not taking into account. So basically, we're just averaging out those factors. And if we could get more fine-grained data, then we can refine our estimates to
Yeah,
make
I
it
mean,
more accurate.
one thing worth noting is the companies provide no information about what types of queries they receive, how many, so there's really no information about how AI is being used, which makes it difficult to do these types of studies.
Yeah, yeah. And if you do some search for flies for getting the directions from point A to point B, some companies show you the carbon emission or the carbon emission you saved. But when you look at their AI products or AI services, there's no such information. No, not for water, not for carbon, not for energy.
What would you want more of from the companies to do better analyses? Because we are now there's so many models out there and AI's everywhere.
So we need more data from those companies so that we can help them improve the efficiency. Because the universities have a large talent pool, and we're happy to help the technology industry to improve their water efficiency, to improve their energy efficiency. So I think if they give us more data, then we can really try our ideas instead of just doing some simulation in the playground. Also, I think for the end users, they could just keep the users informed because eventually it's the users who are using the services. But somehow companies want users to use more of their services. So if they let users know their environmental impact of using the AI models, there could be some conflict with their business growth that might be a concern. And but I truly believe that if you have the transparency, then users are making more informed decisions. This can help drive up the efficiency. About 15 years ago, no company disclosed their PUE, which is the energy efficiency measurement for the data center facilities. But now every company discloses the PUE. So it kind of like it's initially it was a competition, but now like this competition turns out to be good because it drives those companies and motivate them to become more efficient.
So what you're saying is basically if they had to put at each search query like how much water you're using in this response and this question, then they would want to compete to make that a better
Some
number.
sense, yeah, yeah. Right
We
now,
would also maybe want to do less searches though, right? Because if you knew their
well,
cost.
maybe, but but yeah, that could be.
Yeah. Has this changed your use of AI? Do you feel like it's the same as like letting the water run? If you were to use AI.
I mean, of course, water is one factor, but even uh, besides water, I tend to use fewer searches, fewer AI models as much as I can. Because, for example, if I'm doing trying to search for some information, I usually use some search because that's a lot less energy consuming compared to using AI models.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you think you should suggest to people who use AI about what they should think about, whether they should take this water usage into consideration, or do you think it's something we should leave it to the companies to try to solve?
As I said, users do have a role. But we shouldn't be scared. So, we just be mindful about our usage. Let's not waste it.
Well, thank you very much. This was really helpful, and really appreciate your contributions because without your work, we wouldn't have known any of this.
Thank you. My pleasure.